Hello, I'm Jim Cornell, and this is Base to Base, the weekly biotech podcast from Air Coastal Media. Yes, welcome again to the Base to Base biotech podcast, and this is number 49, and it's going live on March the 6th, which is Oreo Cookie Day and, ironically, Dentist's Day. And no tooth interviews today. However, it is International Women's Day on Sunday, and we do have a female CEO for our second guest of the week this week. And you thought this podcast was just thrown together at random. Last week we chatted about GPCRs and more with Sean McDonald, CEO of Panakeia Therapeutics. And in our conversation with CEO of Mertz Therapeutics, Stefan Koenig, we looked, or I guess more accurately, heard about neurodegenerative conditions and a botulinum neurotoxin. This week it's equally varied as we chat with Haseeb Ahmad, CEO of Purespring Therapeutics, about gene therapies in kidney disease. And the second conversation is with Pahini Pandya, CEO of Panakeia, about colorectal cancer biomarkers and the potential of AI in clinical decision-making, and also how AI can transform workflows in diagnostics. If you do have news or suggestions for who should be on the podcast, or indeed any other suggestions or comments, please do get in touch at jim@deeptechdigest.com, which is also the address you can use if you're interested in advertising with us, or sponsoring a podcast episode, or for event coverage, or if your chat app gave you our email address by mistake. Alright, let's take a look at the news you may have missed over the past week at deeptechdigest.com. Gallbladder cancer could soon be detected in blood. A new lab is being built to speed up diagnostic innovation for biotech and pharma partners. And Valinor and Renew are partnering to generate the largest neurological disease multiomics dataset. Panome Bio is looking to a new metabolomics data solution for biomarker discovery and drug development. A next-generation flu vaccine is being developed, and it's being financed by the EU, and there have been some promising results for a rare pediatric epilepsy treatment. The first medicine for allergic fungal rhinosinusitis has received US approval, and a study has found the first in utero stem cell therapy for fetal spina bifida repair is safe. An HPV vaccine provides long-term protection against cervical cancer. Immune cells remember their location, so maybe they can be used instead of Google Maps. An antifibrotic drug shows promise for premature ovarian insufficiency, and you can read all of these and plenty more at deeptechdigest.com. Okay, time for our first interview, and we're going to chat with Haseeb Ahmad, CEO of Purespring Therapeutics, which is a precision nephrology company pioneering first-in-class targeted genetic therapies designed to preserve kidney function. Hi Haseeb, thanks for being with us today. Perhaps, maybe to start, you could tell us a bit about the company.
Yeah, so Purespring, what we're doing is really very unique. So we're a precision nephrology company. What that means is that we're very much focused on targeted delivery of genetic therapeutics directly to the kidney. We're focused on first-in-class, best-in-class medicines, all which have commercial blockbuster potential. Ultimately, our goal is to preserve kidney function. That's kind of the big thing we're focused on, but we don't lose sight of the fact that operating in kidney disease right now is a really interesting time. There's huge unmet need. This is a top 10 disease area in terms of mortality. But in terms of healthcare spend, obviously because of dialysis, it's in the top 5 in terms of dialysis. So really interesting place to focus on. We are very specific in terms of where we focus, not just genetic therapeutics, but specifically focused on glomerular disease. So we target the glomerulus.
Right. And you've had quite the career at Novartis before this. What was it about Purespring that made you interested in taking the role there?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very blessed, although you can see me because we're on video here, but I think people listening can't see the video. I'm older than I look, Jim, is what I'd say. I've had a quite a rich, I've had a rich career. I've been in the industry for over 25 years. Really good career at web companies like Schering-Plough, Merck, and as you mentioned, more likely for Novartis. Some professional reasons and personal reasons. So professionally, if you look at the last kind of roles I did, I was president of Novartis Europe, which is about a third of the business, the commercial side of the business. Prior to that, I ran the gene therapies business at Novartis for a period. So I have an interest in gene therapies. And prior to that, I was in global roles at a time when Novartis decided to get into renal disease. So professionally, I was interested in renal disease because it's a huge area of unmet medical need. And professionally, I'm really captivated by how do you take gene therapies, these 21st century medicines, and get them reimbursed and adopted in 20th century healthcare systems. So that's kind of a professional part of it. But I have a huge personal connection as well. My father, who's passed away now a few years ago, was a pioneering nephrologist. So he worked in nephrology in renal disease. He was a pioneer in home dialysis, bringing dialysis into people's homes. And he also co-invented one of the world's first portable dialysis machines. So I guess, I was at a stage in life where my professional and personal goals and ambitions started to align, and it was the right disease area for me. But it was also the right platform. Having an understanding of gene therapies and some of the challenges, the more I understood the platform, the more I felt this was really a natural choice. I really felt this was a company where I was going to belong. And it's a year in now. It's kind of lived up to the promise. I really feel like I belong here. There's a good balance in my role between purpose and impact. What we're doing is really purposeful, and I think, potentially we could have a really big impact on patients.
I think the most important thing is that you enjoy what you're doing. So if it's
Absolutely.
if it's a move that's made that difference on a personal level, then it's all worthwhile. Yeah.
Yeah, and also learning day to day. I mean, I think in most jobs, you get jobs with bigger scale and you do similar things on a slightly bigger scale. Being the CEO of a biotech is actually an opportunity to now really learn for the first time in a number of years, completely new things that I hadn't focused on previously.
I was going to ask you that. How different is what you're doing now to that world of big pharma?
When people make the comparison between big pharma and biotech, I think it's overstated. And I think for a couple of reasons. One, unconsciously, I think people in big pharma perhaps have some snobbery towards smaller biotechs, earlier stage companies, and some of that comes from maybe 20, 30 years ago. There's also people in biotech who say they never wanted to work in big pharma, but perhaps haven't even been there because of the perception it's slow and hierarchical. But from a leadership perspective, the principles are exactly the same. My job is to make sure that I can align, inspire, enable people, create a culture where really smart people can do great things. So what's the same is the basic leadership principles. I think the purpose in terms of trying to make a real positive dent into a disease area is exactly the same. What's different clearly is the size of organization budgets. That's very different. What's also different is kind of what I guess we consider to be or would call the kind of the value creation cycle. So if you're in a big pharma company, value creation is about creating long-term sustainable cash flow for investors, which typically are institutional investors. So they want to see these are products going to have long-term cash flow, margin improvement across the company. They're the kind of things that matter to them. So they'll see share price appreciation. They'll get nice dividends. In biotech, the value creation is rather than 20 or 30 years, you're typically looking at 5 to 10 year periods. And it's really looking more at return on investment for the investors who've taken huge risk and put in capital in what is a highly risky, capital intensive kind of arena. So I think from a leadership perspective, there's more similarities than differences. Clearly, for someone like me with a commercial background, what's really different isn't about being in biotech. It's more that I'm now managing teams who are responsible for manufacturing, research, clinical development. They're new areas for me. One thing that I feel blessed with is that, I wasn't like a Harvard MBA who worked for McKinsey and then came straight in at a C-suite level in a large company. I worked my way up through the ranks. So I have done single contributor roles. I've run small organizations, run country organizations. So it's rebuilding some of the muscles that perhaps I used earlier in my career.
Could you tell me a little bit about what you're addressing specifically at Purespring?
Yeah, so we're focused on renal gene therapy, but if I put a bit more specificity towards it, we've taken a very considered and thoughtful approach to what we do. So we have a platform across all of our assets, a gene therapy platform called Glonthera. And what we do with that platform is we load it with a genetic payload that targets the podocyte, a specific cell within the glomerulus, which I'll come on back to in a moment. What's nice about our approach is, firstly, the glomerulus itself is a highly vascular unit. So it's almost an ideal target for vector delivery. So we get really high transduction, so you can get enough delivered to the glomerulus. And then the podocyte, which sits within the glomerulus, is a specialized cell which has a number of functions, but the main two are maintaining kidney filtration, but also maintaining overall glomerular health. So if you have podocyte dysfunction and there's missing genes within the podocyte and an inability to create proteins, that clearly can lead to poor kidney filtration and kidney disease. So what we're all about is taking this platform, which has high transduction for the glomerulus, this highly vascularized unit, and we're delivering these genetic payloads which target the podocyte. And the podocyte is a cell which is terminally differentiated. What that means is it doesn't turn over. It's almost the ideal cell to target with gene therapy. We're delivering it locally, which is really important for gene therapies because we're delivering it typically less than 10% of the viral dose of a systemic gene therapy. And that gives us an opportunity to take a really different approach and use the podocyte as a factory for protein production and potentially bring the treatments to patients which not only will be highly efficacious, but will also be delivered locally with obvious benefits, but also because podocytes don't turn over, there's a potential for this to be a one and done therapy.
How does the gene therapy work with the podocytes?
We are approaching it. There's two different types of diseases that we're focused on. There's monogenic diseases, which by virtue of the name suggests, there'll be a single missing or faulty gene where we will deliver the gene, therefore, to the podocyte. It will sit within the podocyte as a nuclear episome. So doesn't get integrated into the cell genome and then produces protein. So we're basically using it as a factory for protein production. We're also doing the same for non-monogenic, more complex diseases, where again, we're delivering genes that perhaps are missing, or by augmenting and adding additional genes, you'll get further protein production.
And so could you maybe give me a bit of an overview of where the gene therapy field is at right now and how it's changing in about 5 minutes? I mean, obviously, you could go on for 2 hours.
I was smiling because you can spend 5 days answering this question, and everyone has various different kind of war stories and transformational stories that they can tell. I think we're at a really interesting point with gene therapies. Clearly, what we've seen in this arena, which is now starting to mature, we're now 5-10 years in terms of our understanding of gene therapies, we're seeing some really impressive results. Firstly, so if you look at spinal muscular atrophy, clearly Novartis first entered that with Zolgensma. If you look at sickle cell disease, there are people alive today who are hitting milestones that they wouldn't have otherwise. And perhaps they wouldn't even been alive today. And that can certainly be said for those diseases. There are at the same time significant headwinds. So if you look at that first generation of companies that came through with gene therapies, many of them had significant challenges around, on the commercial side, how do you get these things reimbursed, which they're one-time therapies in reimbursement systems, which are designed for very different types of medicines. There's significant manufacturing challenges around how reproducible is the process. Safety, occasionally some safety challenges that got lots of headlines. So there's some of the headwinds that are coming through. But if you take a step back, they're not that dissimilar, these discussions, to what people were saying about monoclonal antibodies in maybe the early 90s or mid 90s, where people thought this was science fiction and they had questions about manufacturing scale, about potential safety issues. I think we've learned a lot now versus even 5 years ago. We now know a lot more about how to design vectors, how to choose the right capsids, choose the right promoters. We've learned a lot about manufacturing at high yield, making sure there are far fewer empty capsids that are being delivered as part of administration. We've learned a lot, I think, about delivery and local administration, which has significant advantages over systemic administration. And that's kind of the approach that we're taking. We're taking all of those learnings and saying, how do we take some of these headwinds that other companies have taken and create a tailwind by choosing, firstly, the right kind of biology, target the right organ. Can you target it directly? Target cells which are terminally differentiated, therefore you'll get durable efficacy, local delivery. So in many ways with our Glonthera platform, we're trying to take all of these learnings, taking the best of breed and creating what is almost a new de-risked kind of approach to gene therapy.
Are other companies working on this and doing things in a similar way to you, or how does your approach differ to existing treatments and treatments that are maybe in other companies' pipelines?
We're not just different, we are unique. We are the only company in the clinic now in clinical trials in humans focused on renal gene therapy. We're also the only company that's looking at renal gene therapy through direct delivery. And clearly there's IP that we put around that, which means that, we have a platform that is very unique. If you want to deliver genetic payloads directly to the glomerulus, really ours is the only way that we're aware that you can do it. What's also different about the approach that we're taking in gene therapy is that we're not just looking at monogenic diseases, but we're also looking at these more complex non-monogenic diseases and using the podocyte as a factory for protein production.
Could you tell me about PS002 or 002 and how it works and what it addresses?
So PS002, the target indication is IgA nephropathy. IgA nephropathy, it's a condition, it's a renal condition, which leads to elevated proteinuria that predominantly affects young adults. We'll come back onto young adults in a moment. But if you look at the cascade of disease, what happens is that immune complexes form in the glomerulus. As they get deposited in the glomerulus, they're seen as effectively a foreign body, and that starts an inflammatory cascade. And you start to get inflammation then within the glomerulus, which leads to poor filtration. What we're doing is we're delivering a gene called CFI, complement factor I, which produces a protein, complement factor I is the name of the protein as well, which is a complement inhibitor. What that does is it deactivates the inflammatory process, the complement activation process that is triggered by these complexes being deposited. So what we do is by deactivating it, what you do is prevent the formation of that inflammation, therefore preserve kidney function. That's how it works in its intent.
And so where are you at on the clinical trial pathway right now?
Yeah, so this is probably the most exciting part about 2026 is this is the year we are now a clinical stage company. We're a multi-asset company, so we have a number of assets, 3 assets currently in our pipeline. We're starting with PS002, which is in a non-monogenic condition, IgA nephropathy, and then we'll be going on to other monogenic conditions. Last year for PS002, we got orphan designation from the EMA. We got an IND approval for our phase 1, phase 2 trial to kick off by the FDA in the US. And we also got the equivalent, the clinical trial application CTA approval from the MHRA. And now we are very much progressing to execution. So we've set up a number of sites, we're screening patients and are recruiting patients into this trial as we speak.
What are your hopes and goals for how this will work with people with kidney disease?
Goes back, I think, to the purpose, which is to preserve kidney function. And if you consider IgA nephropathy, I mentioned to you, these are people, typically young adults, late 20s, early 30s, when they get diagnosed. These are folk who are in their most productive years of life. So whilst, first I'll look at an economic perspective and then a personal perspective. From an economic perspective, if you're a healthcare system or a government, you've got these people who are at a really important point in life where they can be working, driving productivity, creating wealth within an economy, paying taxes. And the consequence of IgA nephropathy and not treating them effectively is actually they're going to do quite the opposite. The risk of them not having good kidney health is that they're not productive. There's a high rate of unemployment, over 50% rate of unemployment in patients with kidney disease, and they end up on dialysis, which is hugely expensive. $130 billion in the US alone is paid for dialysis. So we want to make a meaningful change in the trajectory of disease for these patients, because these are patients, whilst they're not just productive and young folk, these are people who are, as well as starting their careers, they're starting their home lives, that maybe they have partners. If they choose to, they're starting families. This is a disease that when it comes to work-life, well, I was going to say integration, but work-life disintegration can have a huge impact on patients and their families. And to have the opportunity to delay, prevent dialysis, to delay or prevent transplant is hugely exciting. So the big hope is that these patients, about 400,000, 450,000 patients globally, that will have the potential to access treatment that potentially could be a one-and-done therapy that's going to prevent them from getting onto dialysis, ultimately prevent them potentially from having a transplant, but more importantly, to live the kind of everyday lives that folk like you and I potentially sometimes take for granted, because I haven't been affected by IgA nephropathy directly. So that's my hope, that in 5-6 years' time, I walk from King's Cross Station to the office and I probably pass maybe a couple of thousand people on the way. The big hope is that in 5-6 years' time, maybe there's 20, 30 people I walk past that actually are benefiting from this treatment, and they're walking to work or they're going to do something that perhaps they wouldn't be doing otherwise.
Yeah, that's excellent. And the one and done is huge as well, because there's nothing worse than having a fantastic treatment that is still life affecting, or that, really doesn't improve that quality of life.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of insight there we've got from patients across disease areas in my own career, that particularly when you're a patient staring down the barrel potentially of dialysis and going in and out of hospital, even psychologically having to inject yourself, whether it's weekly or monthly, is something that patients don't want to do. They just want to enjoy the joys of everyday life. Many of us don't have to inject ourselves weekly, monthly, or take pills daily.
Clearly, this is something that you mentioned, the one and done, but how important overall is it, do you think, to have a range of different approaches to things like kidney disease?
Hugely important for a couple of reasons. One is there hasn't been an innovation in the kidney disease space over the last 20 years. I think the last 5 years, you've started to see stuff come through. The burden of disease is quite significant. There's about 850 million people globally who suffer from some form of kidney disease. As I mentioned, in terms of mortality, it's in the top 10. But in terms of cost to healthcare systems, it's in the top 5. If you're in the top 5 for spend, but you're in the top 10 for prevalence or mortality, clearly it's not being treated effectively enough. So we need more options. And if you look across the different kidney diseases, there'll be a plethora of these monogenic, quite rare kidney diseases. But then there's some of those larger, more complex, non-monogenic diseases. To tackle that, there's going to be no golden bullet. We're going to need an array of therapies.
And how does that connect with partnerships? Do you have a lot of partnerships, or are you looking to partnerships to help with what you're doing?
It's something we've really just started to explore right now. In that preclinical phase, the real focus was getting our lead asset clinic ready, which we've now done. And through that process, we've got some really nice preclinical data in vitro, but also in our animal models. And we've laid down IP. To a point I mentioned earlier, that we're now in a position where if there's a company that had a genetic payload that they wanted to deliver to the podocyte, it would make sense for them to partner with us, because we've got a platform that we know can do that in large animals. We know that the regulator is comfortable with the biodistribution data, and obviously we have IP that we've got around our platform as well. So we're now at this point, well, it's not our primary focus. Our primary focus is on the lead asset, and we've got a very exciting second asset coming through as well. It is something which is an area that we would explore if there was the right partner and it was the right science. We think it could make a real positive dent in the world of kidney disease and glomerular health. That's something we would explore.
You mentioned a second asset. What can you tell me about what else is in the pipeline?
If you look at our website, our second asset says undisclosed. We will be disclosing it in the next couple of months. So we're very close to disclosing it. We're very excited about it. The reason we say undisclosed is this is a disease area where there's no currently available treatment. There's no current licensed medications in that disease area. And it's an area that has significant technical challenges to delivering therapeutics. We're now at a point where we've overcome those technical challenges and we're ready to kind of take the covers off that program. It's a monogenic condition. It's a large condition. We'll be announcing it in the March-April period. And then later in the year, we'll be presenting some of the preclinical data that we've got, which is very exciting.
Is that another first in class? Will you be the first
First
one?
in class and potentially curative if you can identify and treat patients early enough, by the fact that it is a monogenic condition. So if there's a patient that has a faulty gene and you can identify it early enough before they're prevalent and you can replace it with a working copy of the gene, that could have transformative efficacy, certainly prevent and delay disease, and potentially for some patients, it could be potentially curative.
I love it when we're able to talk about something totally new and something that can make a huge difference. So many people around the world suffering from kidney-related diseases. Next, we're talking biomarkers, among other things. Panakeia Technologies recently published information showing that AI can determine critical colorectal cancer biomarkers in minutes in a test across more than 1,200 patients in NHS hospitals in the UK. To tell us more is Panakeia CEO Pahini Pandya. And of course, as Sunday is International Women's Day, it's great to have yet another female CEO on the podcast. All right, it's wonderful to have you on the show this week, Pahini. Thanks so much. And I wonder if to start, you can tell us a bit about the company.
At Panakeia, we're the world's first in silico multi-omics company. What this really means is we've developed a AI-driven platform, Pan Profiler, that can take in simple, routinely used bright field pictures of cells and tissues, the kinds that have been used by biologists and scientists like me, as well as pathologists in the clinic for several decades. We can take in these simple images, analyze them using AI, and decode complete biology at different levels. What I mean by this is you can identify genomic changes, protein changes, RNA changes entirely digitally, which for the very first time opens up a lot of opportunities. And we've shown that this works across more than 32 solid cancers, and we've been able to leverage the technology to deliver a couple of clinical products into the market as well. Company-wise, we have locations in both London and Cambridge.
What are some of the bottlenecks or pain points in diagnostics and decision-making within healthcare currently?
Yeah, so Jim, perhaps it might be helpful to tell you why I founded Panakeia, which will set the context around the bottlenecks I saw, which still exist today. So I was doing a cancer-focused PhD, and I had my own cancer scare, and I had to wait for more than a month to get an all clear because we were waiting for results of many lab tests. These were some of the same lab tests that I was doing during my PhD to understand the disease. So that was a very, very big realization I had, because these were some of the simplest of the tests. I was doing much more complex science and was hoping that this would someday translate into real world setting. And that 1 month wait here within the NHS made me realize that if this is the situation here, it's much worse in other parts of the world, including India, where I grew up. And patients and their families need solutions now. So one of the biggest challenges with diagnostics is accessibility, right? So I came at it from a perspective of accessibility. What I mean by accessibility is it shouldn't just be cheaper. It should also be timely. So it should give you results faster. It shouldn't take days or weeks, which is what currently some of the biggest challenges are. It shouldn't need very high-end, complex infrastructure and very, very deep technical expertise in order for you to be able to deliver an assay. You shouldn't have to train for 15, 20 years, which is currently the case with a lot of complex molecular assays that we see out there in the market today. And finally, it should also be accessible in the sense that it should work around the technical constraints that you have in the ecosystem. So one example, which is especially core to Panakeia's offerings, is you have very, very limited amount of tissue available from patients. You cannot keep going back and collecting more tissue to run more assays every time you deplete that sample. So that was one of the single biggest bottleneck that I identified, along with all of these other systemic bottlenecks which needed to be alleviated in order to make diagnostics accessible and improve its utility. It already has some great utility, and I think there's a huge opportunity to improve and scale on that further. So that's why Panakeia was founded, with a vision of making precision medicine accessible through precision diagnostics. That's why we've developed the solutions that we've developed, where we can take in routinely used bright field images, which are the working horse, both in clinical settings as well as in research and drug discovery. And we built solutions around that. And I was in a lucky position where I was able to reverse engineer my PhD in order to be able to do so.
Recently, there was a publication about colorectal cancer biomarkers. Could you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so the colorectal cancer solution that we have is built off our Pan Profiler platform, which I mentioned a little while ago. It uses the exact same technology, but what it does is for a very specific cancer, colorectal cancers, it identifies a specific biomarker, which is around mismatch repair deficiency. Now, all colorectal cancer patients who are diagnosed with cancers need to get tested for mismatch repair deficiency, and that can be done either using an immunohistochemical assay or next generation sequencing or PCR-based approaches. And what our solution does is, instead of you needing a wet lab test, we can take in routinely used pathology images that a pathologist uses to diagnose whether the patient actually has colorectal cancer or not. We can use the exact same images, analyze the changes of the cells within the tissue, and we can tell you whether the sample has mismatch repair deficiency or not. So we can provide you with MMR or MSI status in minutes at the click of a button and a fraction of the cost. And the paper that came out in Nature Digital Medicine is, as I perceive it, a very big landmark study because it is one of the largest real-world blinded clinical evaluations where we actually evaluated the models and the software product on more than 3,500 patients, 3,576 images to be specific, which came from 1,243 patients. And we did the validation across 3 clinical sites, and the study was led by Leeds University and Leeds Teaching Hospitals, which is where I believe you studied as well. So it's something that should be close to your heart.
Yeah, definitely the first of probably too many happy memories, but a long time ago. I guess within the NHS, we already talked about bottlenecks. I guess there are bottlenecks in the NHS that extend beyond diagnosis, and you kind of alluded to that already. So is this something that's going to help patients with things like delays in getting treatment?
Yeah, you're very spot on. So what we showed in our paper in the large scale validation was that tests perform as well as the wet lab tests. So we had a 93.8% agreement with the existing wet lab test, and we were able to return results on 86% of the cases. So 86 out of 100 patients would have a result through this approach, and they could get access to treatment much, much faster. So mismatch repair deficiency testing is needed in order to inform if the patient needs additional downstream testing to diagnose or confirm Lynch syndrome, or if they could respond to immunotherapy. So if patients actually have mismatch repair deficiency, you could benefit from immunotherapy, and it improves your likelihood of survival by up to 80%. So every single patient today gets MMR testing in the UK within the NHS. The turnaround times are what significantly varies, and more often than not, treatment teams cannot make decisions on the treatment. Even if they're diagnosed with cancer, they cannot make decisions on treatment till they have the MMR deficiency status. And that's what we help accelerate through the Pan Profiler colorectal product, is being able to have complete information when you're first viewing the case so that you can make decisions much, much faster. So you'd essentially shorten or compress the time to decision making from weeks to a few days at best. It can be as little as 1 day because the results are very, very rapid. So for the smaller samples, you can get results in seconds. And for some of the larger samples, it takes a few minutes.
So how do you then move from the proof that the technology works to getting it implemented in healthcare systems, not necessarily in the UK, but and beyond?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think for every single healthcare system, there are quite a lot of challenges, right, when it comes to implementing at scale. The first one I would say is getting clinical champions. And because of the amount of value we're able to give the clinical teams and the patients, we've actually had a lot of buy-in from clinical champions, not just in the UK, but internationally as well. And this is where it gets very exciting because our products are it's not just the technology that works, it has live clinical deployments, which is already showcasing the sort of impact that it can make on real world clinical workflows, right? And the sort of potential impact it can make on patients, which is driving a lot of interest from additional sites towards adoption. Off the back of this, we are also working with regulators, which I think is a big one. So we not only is the product UK CE marked, so it has regulatory approvals in the UK, but what we are doing is we are taking this above and beyond that. So we're working with the MHRA as a part of their AI airlock program, which is one of the world's first of its kind regulatory sandbox for AI-based medical devices. And we're one of the 7 companies that have been selected as part of the phase 2 of this airlock. And we're working with the regulators to help them identify uncertainties in regulations, especially when it comes to novel AI-based technologies, how we can collectively address them to make sure that such innovations are able to translate to a patient in a safe manner, but in a very, very timely manner as well. So we're not bogged down and we don't spend too much time bringing such solutions to markets. We've done something similar with the FDA as well. So US is another market where we worked with FDA on a project led by Friends of Cancer Research. It's called the DigiPath project, which included 10 AI software vendors, including ours. And this was focused more on breast cancer. So dealt with our other product for breast cancers, which is UKCA mark, and does something similar to the pan profiler colorectal. And it allowed us the opportunity to work with pharma, academics, as well as clinicians to establish what are some of the challenges that happen, that exist currently when you're looking at assessment, regulation, approvals of AI-based solutions, and how can we start thinking collectively as a whole in terms of addressing some of these uncertainties and raising the bars, raising the standards, but also making it more practical and accessible. So that's some of the pieces of work we've done on the regulatory side. And then obviously in parallel, we're also working on the reimbursement of the commercial side, which varies quite significantly depending on the markets you're in and the customers you're selling to.
And more generally speaking, how can AI transform diagnostics and decision making?
Yeah, so I think broadly, speaking just beyond Panakeia, AI as a whole, as a technology, really has the potential to make a lot of things accessible. What this means is you're now looking at solutions that can be administered, which don't need years and years and decades of expertise, combined with that years and years and decades of expertise, which can then collectively increase the standard as well, right? So you actually end up improving your accuracy, but delivering care in a faster, much better time frame, which then what really allows clinicians to do is free up time, which they're really short of, to focus on things that really matter, and that's the patients.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there are other companies developing AI diagnostic tools. Is it becoming a crowded space, do you think?
I mean, I think, yes, I agree that there are a lot of AI-based diagnostic solutions which are coming up, but they're also coming up because there is such large unmet need in the space. What this means is you have everything from very early detection to something that can actually diagnose recurrence or relapse of a disease, right? So all of these are broadly classed as diagnostics, but what they do is really, really different. And this is where I think Panakeia is quite different in the sense that you have a lot of the traditional AI diagnostics that we've heard a lot of focus very much on single cancer, single biomarker, or cancer, non-cancer detection. So replicating what humans do, whereas what Panakeia did is take an approach where we give humans superpowers. So we give pathologists superpowers by decoding biology that they know exists within that morphology. So we actually had pathologists tell us, yes, by AI, I can tell if the patient has this sort of a molecular characteristics. I just can't do it as well as the wet lab test. So that's what we took, and we really, really ran with it. And we were able to design the system which can, at the moment, what we are showing in the live clinical setting is focused on a few markers, but our platform, which we're working on with pharma, really allows you to decode biology at scale. So you're looking at being able to start thinking of, okay, you can identify DNA, RNA, protein, which traditionally needed different equipment, infrastructure, technologies in order to be able to interrogate using a single tech stack. That's quite powerful, and that can really change how we think about stuff. So it's about these differentiated use cases which still exist within the diagnostic space, which personally makes me very excited about.
Lots of unmet need, as you said.
Yeah, and we've only scratched the surface. I know we talk a lot about cancers, but there are so many other diseases where we are now starting to see a lot of effort and investment put into as development of drugs and driving precision medicine, right? So that's only going to explode, which means the market need will only get bigger.
And quite often, as we've seen many times in the past, the diagnosis often leads to better drug discovery.
Exactly.
Again, more general, but where do you think that AI is capable of making the biggest difference, or does it apply right across the board?
It's capable of making a difference quite broadly across the board because it is very much a general purpose technology. It is as general purpose as what you would have when you're thinking of machines as a whole, right? Now your machine can then be fitted or designed for something that's a little bit more specific, whether that's making clothes or whether that's running scientific experiments. But the underlying principles largely are the same. The concepts are the same. So that's the way I see at least AI. And that's why I think it has a huge potential to make an impact, not just in diagnostics or in healthcare, but in a wide variety of industries, which is what we're seeing in the world today. It's just about how you adapt it to your use case. There are some use cases which are obviously much higher value, and some use cases where perhaps it might be an overkill to use AI, and there might just be more effective ways of doing it for a variety of considerations, whether that's cost, whether that's, the ability to implement it or accessibility.
The whole field of AI, including diagnostics, it's all evolving so quickly. Is that a challenge in of itself, and are there other challenges?
That's a very, very good point. It is definitely a challenge in the sense that it's moving very quickly. You have to keep up. But also at the same time, it's a great opportunity, right? Because what this means is you're not stuck with very specific technologies. The sort of approaches we used, 5 years ago are very different from the sort of approaches we use now, which actually, even in the last 1 year, we've seen so much evolution happen on a matter of months, right? So that's a huge, huge opportunity, because the gains that what we are getting, whether that's in terms of applying it to a real world or whether that's in terms of even how you develop your own tools, is significantly compounded. There's a saying which really resonated with me, especially when I was reflecting over how AI has evolved over the last few years. It says like nothing and then all at once, right? That phrase really, really just came to home when you think about AI. That's exactly where we are at right now, from where we are in terms of timing of AI explosion.
And I know that at the beginning we were talking about colorectal cancer biomarkers.
Yeah.
What other things are you working on as a company beyond that?
Yeah, so we already have another product for breast cancers, which does 3 biomarkers of breast cancer: ER, PR, and HER2, which are also similar to mismatch repair deficiency testing needed for all breast cancer patients that are diagnosed as per guidelines. So we have 2 clinical products, and then of course we have the platform which we're working on the biopharma side, so driving a lot of research and development with avenues to scale in the near future.
So how do you see the field evolving in 2026 before we get to your company of evolution in 26?
There's quite a few different things that I'm very, very excited about. It's genuinely going to be a pivotal year, both for AI in healthcare and for Panakeia. Especially from a Panakeia standpoint, I'm looking forward to the scale of impact, right? We've proven the technology works in real world conditions where, you had different types of scanner being used, different methods for preparing tissue, different processes and workflows altogether, and we've shown that it works, and it works well. Now we have these products which are in hospitals. We have a published evidence base, so we really want to focus on getting our product in the hands of more and more clinicians, not just in the UK, but worldwide. So that's what we're really going to work on to ensure that patients benefit from this faster. And patients have always consistently been a core part of our journey. Beyond that, I'm genuinely excited about what our multi-omic platform enables us to do, especially in the drug discovery space and the R&D space, using population scale molecular profiling, which hasn't been possible before. And I'm very proud of our regulatory contribution. So I'm looking forward to how our work with MHRA, FDA will shape frameworks that will govern AI in healthcare, especially given that MHRA is expected to publish its new regulatory frameworks in the near future. So yeah, those are the things, at least for 2026, but I suspect my plate will be quite full.
Oh, exactly. There's quite a lot there. Could you maybe go into a bit more detail on some of the things that you're working on? Because it seems like some of those are quite critical to the development of healthcare and improving healthcare.
In terms of getting our product into hands of as many hospitals as we can, we're already focused very heavily on the NHS, where we are focused on bringing both the pan-profiler colorectal and subsequently the pan-profiler breast to the markets. Both of these are UKCA marked. We've also drawn in interest from international markets. So we're already working with partners in countries like India, and we are also looking at other markets, which include the US markets as well. So that's a little bit on the commercial front, just focusing on how we can get our solutions to as many people as possible. As far as the MHRA and FDA are concerned, I think that's a little bit more work that is already going on, and that will be published in the near future. So that should be accessible to more people as and when it's published. It's still work that's ongoing, especially for the MHRA.
Is there anything else that you wanted to mention, either generally or specific to your company?
Maybe a couple of things just to highlight is that this is really a platform story. So it's not just a one-off solution, as we've already shown, and some of the early work that's happening in the biological research space, so to speak. So there'll be more work coming out soon later in the year. And the speed on the healthcare side is really transformative. You're looking at minutes instead of days or weeks. That's phenomenal. And that's what we've seen excite a whole range of stakeholders in the space, not just clinicians, but also policymakers, as well as people who are responsible for paying, as well as patients, right? So to give you a little bit of context, Macmillan earlier last year published actually a paper which focused on the bottlenecks to biomarker testing within the NHS. And one of the things that was a big takeaway was oncologists actually wait a very long time, oftentimes to make the treatment decision because of the delays around biomarker testing. So that was quite well aligned. And it also shows that we are very much on the right track to solving a problem that is a large global unmet need, not just a local unmet need.
When you mentioned that, it made me think about the economics of this. Obviously, there are savings to be made above and beyond the fact that it's helping people, which is the most important thing. But clearly, there are economic savings to be made by some of these accelerated pathways to getting diagnosis. But equally, a lot of healthcare systems around the world are based upon free healthcare. Is there a limitation, or are there sometimes situations where a particular healthcare system wants to introduce something but can't afford to in spite of the savings?
That's a very good question. So I think that really depends on a system by systems basis. If you were to take NHS as an example, I think it's more often than not, and then this is a problem that applies to every technology, not just ours. It's how ready is the system? What are the systemic barriers? And how are you as an organization able to navigate some of those systemic barriers, as is the healthcare system able to navigate them in order to be able to adopt the solutions, right? We've seen different structures with the different sort of markets that we've engaged with, but so far, most of the ones that we've seen, we've found ways to make it adaptable. Maybe one of the challenges, which I would say currently, is the state of digitization of pathology. So in healthcare specifically, not all hospitals will have the ability to digitize the microscope slides. So that is one of the key requirements, and that at the moment will probably block them from adopting our solution, right? You need to be able to have those images. If you're still reliant on microscope slides, it becomes more challenging. But we are starting to see, especially over the last several years because of COVID, we've started to see a lot of new innovations, even for low resource settings, where you could actually have a microscope with a camera attachment, which allows you to actually collect really good images in a relatively standardized way. It's not as automated and as scalable, but it still solves a very, very big challenge for a lot of these resource constrained environments. So there are innovations which are coming there, which will make it only a matter of time for them to be able to be in a position where they could adopt.
Alongside that, nothing is ever static. I would assume that your systems evolve as well. And if there's AI involved, they would probably have to evolve. But then also, not only does your system evolve, the users of that have to be able to keep pace with how that evolution takes place.
The way most AI solutions are currently deployed, the way they are deployed is you deploy them as a frozen system. So oftentimes, especially in the high risk setting, the AI doesn't learn and continuously evolve, although you can keep training models and improve them, but then you do very discrete product releases, right? What this allows you to do, and that's because of how current regulations are. And we know that that will likely change over time as well. But what this allowed us to do is currently, it allows you sufficient time because then, your users only adapt when you have a new product release. But as more evolving models come into play due to permissive regulations and changing regulations, what we will see and what we're actually already seeing is there are some visionaries who are already anticipating that problem. So there are companies which are now coming up which actually help you monitor things like model performance in a real world, like in a continuous setting as well, which then allows users to be more comfortable and have much better ways and infrastructure in order to be able to adapt. So they are also continuously evolving as it goes, but in a way that is more comfortable to them. So we've seen some really cool companies come up in the space.
But it must be an exciting field to be in because of that, because it's not just static.
100%. I mean, the speed at which it moves, it really gives you a lot of energy and enthusiasm. Yeah, it's amazing. I couldn't have asked for better.
It seems that with every interview, we learn about how more and more diseases like cancer are being addressed, not just through cures and treatments, but also through early diagnosis, which can be just as important. Because the podcast isn't exactly on International Women's Day, which is Sunday, we will hopefully have another female CEO on next week, just to bookend that important recognition. So that's it for this week's podcast. If you do want to get in touch with guest opportunities, or if you want to advertise, please feel free to contact us at jim@deeptechdigest.com. So until next time, wherever in the world you are, I hope you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Base to Base Biotech podcast. The Base to Base Biotech podcast is an Air Coastal Media Limited production.